Welcome to our deep dive today. And get ready, because we're going way back in time, like over 500 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, over 500 years to explore this book that still has people talking today, and I think for good reason.
It's pretty wild how relevant it still is.
Totally. We're diving into The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli.
Ooh, Machiavelli.
Yeah, have you heard of this one?
Of course. I mean, come on, who hasn't heard of the Prince, right?
I mean, I think a lot of people
Well,
have heard the name,
yeah.
but maybe they don't really know what it's about, and it's pretty intense.
It's a book that really gets under your skin. You know, it's like one of those books that you read and you can't stop thinking about it even after you've finished it.
And, some of the stuff he talks about, it's like straight up how to grab power and hold on to it.
No kidding.
It's like so blunt.
No sugarcoating.
Yeah, no sugarcoating. And it makes you wonder how much has really changed, in the game of power.
That's the question, isn't it? Like, are we still playing by these same rules, even though it was written so long ago?
I mean, I think in some ways we are, for sure.
Yeah, and that's what keeps people coming back to this book.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating is that he wrote this during a time in Italy when things were incredibly chaotic, and he was right in the middle of it all.
Yeah, he wasn't just some, armchair philosopher.
No.
He was in the thick of it.
Exactly. He was a diplomat. He was involved in the government. He saw firsthand how this game of power was played.
So let's back up a bit for people who might not be totally familiar with this period.
Sure.
What was going on in Italy back then that made this book so explosive?
Well, imagine Italy not as one unified country like we know it today, but as this collection of city-states, each with its own ruler, its own ambitions, constantly fighting each other.
Oh, wow.
And then you've got these bigger powers like France and Spain trying to get a piece of the action. It was a total mess, a constant power struggle.
So Machiavelli is writing The Prince right in the middle of this chaos.
Just right in the thick of it.
And he's trying to lay out a guide for rulers in this crazy world.
That's exactly what he's doing. It's like a handbook for how to survive and thrive in this cutthroat environment.
So where does he even begin? What's his starting point?
Well, he starts by kind of categorizing the different types of states you can rule. There are republics, there are inherited kingdoms, and then there are these brand new ones, like someone just came in and conquered a territory, and now they're the boss.
Okay, so that makes sense. He's setting the stage.
Exactly.
But then he gets into this whole thing about whether it's better for a ruler to be loved or feared.
Yeah, and this is where Machiavelli gets really controversial and really interesting.
Right, because you would think a new ruler would want to be loved by the people.
Yeah.
Why is he so big on fear?
Well, he flat out says, it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. And his reasoning is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, explain that.
He basically thinks that love is fickle. People will turn on you if it suits them, but fear keeps them in line.
So he's not saying be a tyrant necessarily.
Not exactly.
But he is saying you got to be tough.
You got to be tough. You got to understand that people are self-interested. And sometimes you need to make those hard choices to keep things in check.
And you see this play out in how Machiavelli analyzes Cesare Borgia,
Oh, yeah.
this leader he really admired.
Cesare Borgia was a fascinating figure. He was ruthless. He was deceitful. He was ambitious. And Machiavelli was kind of in awe of him.
Yeah, and it's like this whole idea of projecting an image of strength, even if behind the scenes things are a little chaotic.
It's all about perception, isn't it?
Totally.
And Machiavelli even points out that there was another ruler at the time, though he doesn't name names, who preached peace and trust while secretly plotting against everyone. It just goes to show appearances matter.
That's so true.
Appearances matter.
It's all about the brand.
Absolutely. And for a ruler, that performance is everything.
You got to project that image of strength, compassion, even piety.
Even if it's not entirely genuine.
Yeah, and Machiavelli even uses this really interesting metaphor
Oh, yeah.
for how a ruler should approach fortune.
He compares fortune to a woman.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that one.
It's a little provocative, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I get what he's trying to say.
Yeah, he's basically saying you got to be bold.
You got to be bold. You got to grab power and not let go.
Be proactive.
Exactly. Be proactive and be ready to adapt because fortune can change in an instant.
So a ruler can't just sit back and let fate take its course.
No, they got to be in control. They got to be shaping their own destiny.
So it's kind of like a constant game of chess.
That's a great analogy.
Always thinking a few moves ahead.
Absolutely.
Anticipate your opponent's moves.
And be ready to pivot when things don't go your way.
So you're saying being a ruler is not for the faint of heart?
No, it takes cunning, it takes strategy, and sometimes it takes a little bit of ruthlessness to survive in that world.
All right, Machiavelli, you've convinced me so far, but there's a lot more to unpack here.
Oh yeah, we're just getting started.
And we're going to dive even deeper into the world of the prince after the break.
Can't wait. All right, so we're back and ready to dive even deeper into the prince.
Yeah. I'm ready for more Machiavellian wisdom.
Okay, well, let's talk about how a ruler should deal with their enemies, because this is where things get really interesting.
Okay. I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
Well, Machiavelli is all about being decisive and ruthless when it comes to eliminating threats to your power.
No kidding.
He even suggests that it's better to be safe than, take them out before they have a chance to gather power against you.
Wow, that's cold. No room for second chances, huh?
Not according to Machiavelli. He's basically saying that any hesitation or weakness in this game is like painting a target on your back.
So there's no taking the high road in Machiavelli's playbook.
He'd probably say the high road leads straight to exile or worse.
Yikes.
He's very practical, almost chillingly so, in how he breaks down these power dynamics.
It makes you think about how this applies to, like, business deals today. Sometimes you have to be aggressive to come out on top.
Exactly. Machiavelli was way ahead of his time in understanding how cutthroat competition can be, whether it's for political power or market share.
Okay, so we've talked about being tough and projecting the right image, but what about keeping the people on your side? How does Machiavelli say a ruler should handle that whole we the people thing?
Right. Well, he gets into this whole thing about whether it's better to be loved or feared as a ruler.
Didn't he say it's better to be feared?
He did, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. He acknowledges that being loved is great, but he doesn't think it's very realistic in the long run.
Okay, why not?
Because people are fickle. He says they'll turn on you in a heartbeat if it benefits them.
So love is out, fear it is then.
Fear is definitely more reliable, according to Machiavelli. He argues that people are less likely to betray a leader they're afraid of, even if they secretly hate their guts.
That's kind of a bleak outlook on humanity, don't you think?
It is, but Machiavelli wasn't trying to win any popularity contest. He was looking at history and being brutally honest about how people behave when the stakes are high.
I guess in a world where anyone could be plotting against you, you can't be too careful.
Exactly, and Machiavelli wasn't just about brute force either. He also understood the importance of appearances.
Right.
He said a ruler needs to appear virtuous and compassionate, even if they're not always those things in reality.
So basically, fake it till you make it.
Kind of. Machiavelli believed that public perception is a powerful tool. If a ruler can convince the people that they're a good and just leader, they're more likely to stay in power, even if they're making some shady deals behind closed doors.
It's like that saying, power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have.
Perfect example. Machiavelli understood that perception is reality, especially when it comes to power.
All right, Machiavelli, you've convinced me image is everything.
Well,
But let's get back to this whole army thing you mentioned. He's not a fan of mercenaries. What does he say about building a strong military?
he's adamant that a ruler needs their own well-trained army that is loyal to them, not to some random paycheck.
Makes sense you wouldn't want to outsource the protection of your kingdom to some guys who might switch sides if someone offers them more gold.
Exactly. And Machiavelli even used the decline of the Roman Empire as an example of what happens when you start relying too much on outsiders for your security.
You'd think they'd have learned their lesson after that whole et tu, Brute incident.
Apparently not. But Machiavelli was very clear a ruler's true strength lies in the loyalty of their own troops.
So a ruler needs a strong army. But what about physical defenses? Does Machiavelli think fortresses are important?
That's where he gets really interesting. You might think he'd be all about building impenetrable castles and stuff, but he's actually more nuanced.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he argues that fortresses can be useful in some situations, but can backfire in others.
Oh, that's unexpected.
Yeah.
So when would a fortress be a bad idea, according to Machiavelli?
He says if you hole yourself up in a fortress, you risk alienating your people. It's like you're saying, I don't trust you to protect me.
Interesting.
Plus, a fortress can make you a sitting duck if your enemy decides to lay siege.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's almost like those companies that invest heavily in outdated technology, thinking they're safe, but then the world moves on and they're left behind.
That's a great modern parallel. Machiavelli would probably say that true strength lies in adaptability and the support of the people, not just physical barriers.
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Machiavelli is all about being adaptable, seizing opportunities, and always thinking a few steps ahead. But wasn't he also a big believer in learning from the past?
Absolutely. He was a huge history buff. He believed that studying the past, particularly the actions of great leaders, could provide valuable lessons for rulers in the present.
It's like that saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Exactly. Machiavelli saw history as a vast laboratory of leadership experiments. He thought rulers could learn as much from the failures of past leaders as from their successes.
So he wasn't just interested in what worked, but also in what didn't work and why.
Right, he believed that by studying the decisions and mistakes of those who came before a ruler, could gain insights into the timeless principles of power and leadership.
It makes you wonder what Machiavelli would think of today's leaders. Would he be impressed, horrified?
It's a fascinating question. I think you probably have a lot to say about the way we handle power and politics in the modern world. But one thing's for sure, he wouldn't be afraid to speak his mind, even if it ruffled a few feathers.
Speaking of ruffling feathers, one of the most controversial parts of The Prince is his take on morality in politics. It's almost like he's saying ethics don't really matter when it comes to power.
That's a bit of an oversimplification. Machiavelli wasn't saying that morality is irrelevant, but he definitely believed that rulers sometimes need to act in ways that might be considered unethical if it's necessary for the good of the state.
It's like he's saying the ends justify the means.
In a way, yes. He argued that a ruler can't always afford to be bound by strict moral codes. Sometimes they need to make tough decisions that might involve deception, manipulation, or even violence.
So a little white lie here and there is okay if it keeps the kingdom from falling apart.
Machiavelli might say so, but remember, he always stressed that a ruler should strive to appear virtuous even if they're not always acting that way in reality.
It's all about appearances, right?
Right.
But that makes you wonder, how do you square that with being a moral person?
That's the big question that Machiavelli leaves us wrestling with. It's this tension between what's effective and what's ethical that makes The Prince such a challenging and thought-provoking read even centuries later.
Okay, so a ruler needs to be tough, strategic, and maybe a little bit ruthless, but they also need to be able to manage their public image and maybe even bend the truth a little.
Yeah.
What else does Machiavelli say about how to stay in power?
He's all about surrounding yourself with people who are both competent and loyal. He warns against choosing advisors who are too ambitious or who might be tempted to betray you.
I guess that makes sense. You wouldn't want to have a bunch of mini Machiavellis plotting against you in your own court.
Exactly. He understood that a ruler needs a strong and trustworthy inner circle to help them navigate the treacherous waters of politics.
Speaking of treacherous waters, Machiavelli spends a lot of time talking about how a ruler should deal with their enemies. And let's just say he's not exactly advocating for turn the other cheek approach.
He's definitely more of a strike first, strike hard kind of guy. He argues that a ruler must be decisive and ruthless in eliminating threats to their power. He even suggests that it's better to err on the side of caution, even if it means taking preemptive action against potential rivals before they have a chance to gather strength.
Wow, that's pretty intense. No room for diplomacy or compromise in Machiavelli's world.
He certainly recognizes the value of those things, but he's also a realist. He understands that in the world of power politics, sometimes you have to make tough choices that might involve using force or deception to protect yourself and your interests.
So he's not saying that you should go around picking fights, but you also shouldn't be afraid to throw a punch if someone comes at you.
Exactly. He's arguing that a ruler needs to be strong and assertive, willing to defend themselves and their interests, even if it means resorting to unpleasant tactics.
Makes you wonder what he'd think of modern-day warfare.
Oh, I'm sure he'd have a lot to say about drones and cyber attacks.
He probably wouldn't be too impressed with leaders who start wars based on flimsy pretexts.
I think he'd be more interested in whether those wars were ultimately successful in achieving their objectives, regardless of the methods used.
So for Machiavelli, it's all about results.
In many ways, yes, he was a pragmatist who believed that the effectiveness of a leader's actions is ultimately what matters most.
Okay, so Machiavelli says a ruler needs to be tough, strategic, and willing to play hardball when necessary. But what about generosity? Is there any room for kindness in his worldview?
There is, but with a Machiavellian twist. Of course, he talks about generosity as a tool that should be used strategically, not just out of the goodness of one's heart.
So no random acts of kindness for Machiavelli.
Not exactly. He believed that generosity should be used to win favor, build alliances, and strengthen your position. But he also cautioned against being too generous, as this could lead to a depletion of resources and a perception of weakness.
It's like he's saying, don't be a pushover, but don't be a Scrooge either. Find that balance.
That's a great way to put it. Machiavelli was all about finding the right balance between different qualities, always adapting to the specific circumstances.
So generosity with the purpose. What about keeping promises? That's something a ruler should worry about?
This is where things get a little sticky, even for Machiavelli. He argues that a ruler should keep their word whenever possible.
There's a but coming, isn't there?
There is, he says, that if keeping a promise would harm the state or put the ruler at a disadvantage, then it's perfectly acceptable to break that promise.
Whoa, hold on. So basically, it's okay to lie if it benefits you.
Machiavelli wouldn't put it quite that way, but he definitely believed that political promises are not always binding.
I guess in a world where everyone is scheming and plotting, it's hard to know who to trust.
Exactly. And Machiavelli was writing in a time when betrayal and treachery were commonplace. He was trying to prepare rulers for that reality.
So it's like a prenuptial agreement for power.
You could say that it's about protecting yourself and your interests, even if it means going against your word.
This is definitely make me rethink my whole approach to leadership. But seriously, Machiavelli seems to have thought of everything.
He really did cover a lot of ground, and what's amazing is how much of what he wrote about still resonates today. He was a keen observer of human nature, and his insights into the dynamics of power remain remarkably relevant.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of Machiavelli's ideas, like being adaptable. It's strategic, maybe even a little ruthless when it comes to power.
Yeah.
But it seems like he also puts a lot of emphasis on timing, like knowing when to make your move.
Absolutely. Timing is huge for Machiavelli.
Okay, so can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, he really believes that timing is everything in politics.
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough to have a brilliant plan. You have to know the right moment to actually put it into action.
So it's like not just what you do, but when you do it.
Exactly. He compares it to a farmer who has to know the right season to plant their crops.
Okay.
You know, if they plant too early or too late, they risk losing the whole harvest.
Right. That makes total sense.
It's all about seizing the right moment.
I can see how that applies to all sorts of things,
Oh, yeah.
like launching a new product or even just negotiating a deal.
Absolutely. You don't want to jump the gun, but you also don't want to miss your window.
So patience is a virtue, even for a Machiavellian prince.
Machiavelli would definitely agree with that. He believed that a ruler needs to be able to bide their time, assess the situation, and strike when the iron is hot.
So sometimes the best move is to just wait.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most strategic thing you can do is be patient and let your enemies make the first mistake.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get this whole Machiavellian philosophy. It's like a combination of strategy,
Right.
adaptability, and always being a few steps ahead of the game.
That's a great summary.
But there's one thing I'm still kind of struggling with. Like, how does Machiavelli balance all this talk about power and ruthlessness with being a good person?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And it's something people have been debating for centuries.
Yeah.
I mean, Machiavelli does say that virtue is important for a ruler,
Okay.
but he also argues that a ruler can't always let morality dictate their actions.
So it's like there's a different set of rules for politics.
You could say that Machiavelli believed that the world of politics operates according to a different logic than our personal lives. That's pretty interesting, but also kind of unsettling.
It is unsettling, but it also explains why we often see politicians doing things that we would never consider doing ourselves.
Right, like it's almost like we expect them to be a little shady.
Well, Machiavelli was simply acknowledging that the pursuit of power often involves compromises and tough choices.
So reading Machiavelli is kind of like getting a peek behind the curtain of how power really works.
I think that's a great way to put it. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. He shows us the world of politics as it is, warts and all.
So does that mean we all have to become ruthless schemers to get ahead?
No, I don't think that's the message here. I think the real value of Machiavelli is that he makes us think critically about power and leadership.
So it's more about awareness than actually being like a mini Machiavelli.
Exactly. It's about understanding the dynamics of power, how it's acquired, how it's maintained, and the challenges that come with it.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive.
I agree.
Machiavelli is definitely one of those thinkers who stays with you long after you finish reading him. Absolutely. His work is still so relevant because it speaks to these timeless questions about human nature and leadership.
So to wrap things up, I think the big takeaway is that whether you're a CEO, a community organizer, or just someone trying to navigate the complexities of everyday life, Machiavelli's ideas can give you a new perspective on how power works.
And maybe even help you be more strategic in your own life.
Exactly. So until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring the fascinating world of ideas.